I used to believe what mechanics told me about engine longevity. Then I watched the same models cross 7 figures doing the opposite of everything I had been taught. The smell hit me first. Warm oil, faint copper, that lived-in cabin scent of a car that has been someone's daily companion for 2 decades. The owner pulled the dipstick and handed it to me like it was a family heirloom. The film on that stick was honey amber, not coffee black, and the odometer behind him read 7 digits. 1 million miles. On the original block. And he was the 3rd driver that month to roll into my bay with the same story, the same model family, and the same quiet little habit I had spent years dismissing as nothing more than fussiness from older owners with too much time on their hands. That is when it clicked. I had been wrong, not about the parts, not about the tolerances, about the one rule these survivors all shared. Stick with me, because by the end of this, you will know exactly which 9 cars have crossed the million-mile line again and again, why most of their twins died at 200,000, and the single discipline their owners practiced that almost nobody else does. There is one car in this lineup that broke every assumption I had built up across 3 decades of pulling engines apart in dirty garages. I will tell you which one when we get there, and I will show you the contrast between what the long-haul drivers do and what the average owner does, because the gap is not what you think. It is not bigger, it is smaller. So small you would walk right past it if I did not point at it directly. Here is the part that bothers me. Most drivers believe longevity is about luck, or genetics, or the magic of a specific brand. It may be partly true. But after looking at service chain data, talking with many mechanics in shops that handle high mileage fleets, and watching cars cross the million-mile line in person, the pattern is too clean to ignore. The rule is small. It is boring. It would not sell a single magazine cover or pull a single click on a thumbnail, and it would have saved a generation of engines if more people had followed it. So let me walk you through the 9, in the order they taught me the lesson, and let the pattern reveal itself the way it revealed itself to me. Let me start with the Honda Accord, because this one surprises nobody and yet still teaches the lesson cleanly. There is a 1990 Accord that crossed 1 million miles in the hands of a single owner who drove highways across the western United States for almost 3 decades. The car wore through 3 transmissions, a handful of starters, and roughly its own weight in brake pads. But the engine, the same long block it left the factory with, kept running. When I tore down a similar Accord at 400,000 miles, the cylinder walls still showed the original crosshatch honing. Faint, like pencil shading. Not the scored mirror finish you see in a worn-out motor. I ran a fingertip across the inside of the bore, and it felt like fine sandpaper that had been kissed by oil for years. That texture is what protects an engine. Lose it, and the rings have nothing to ride on. Keep it, and you can run forever. The owner had done one thing religiously, and I will keep circling back to it, because every single car on this list shares that habit. He also kept a small spiral notebook in the glove box. Oh, and every receipt for every service was tucked between its pages. He once told me he could trace every quart of oil that engine had ever seen, by date, by brand, by mileage at the moment it was poured in. The Accord is the gateway car. It proves the rule works on a regular family sedan, not just an exotic. It proves a 4-cylinder grocery getter, treated right, can outlive every assumption the car magazines made about it back in 1990. Now, before I go further, I want you to pay attention to the next car, because this is where most viewers tune out and miss the whole pattern. The second car on this list is the one that broke my own beliefs the hardest. If you stick with me through this one, the rest of the list will land differently. You will start seeing your own car in a new way. You will start hearing the engine instead of just listening to the radio. That is the loop. Hang with me. The second car is the Toyota Land Cruiser, specifically the 80 series and the early 100 series with the inline 6. I have seen these trucks cross 1 million miles in service in remote regions, mining camps, long-haul ranch work, the kind of conditions that should chew an engine alive. Dust, heat, cold starts at altitude. And yet, the 1FZ FE block keeps producing compression numbers within 10% of factory spec at mileages that would have melted a softer engine into slag. There is a Land Cruiser running parts deliveries in Australia that crossed 1.2 million kilometers, then crossed it again in miles, and the owner once told a journalist he had never once let the oil go past the interval. Not once, not even by a week. That phrasing stuck with me. Not even by a week. Because most owners think 1,000 miles over is harmless. The Land Cruiser owners I have met treat the interval like a payment due date. Miss it and something invisible gets repossessed. I pulled the valve cover off one of these inline sixes at 600,000 miles, and the inside looked like a museum display. No sludge, no varnish ring around the journals. The kind of clean you only get when the oil is changed before it has a chance to break down into the gummy brown residue that quietly chokes the small passages an engine depends on. That residue is the silent killer in most motors. Land Cruiser owners simply never let it form. They drain it out while it is still doing its job, not after it has stopped. Picture this for 30 seconds. You are standing next to a Lexus LS400 in a service bay. The hood is up, the valve cover is off. The cams are exposed, and the metal underneath them is the color of a fresh nickel. Not varnished, not stained, just clean steel doing its job. That car has 998,000 miles on it. The owner is sipping coffee, completely unbothered, because to him this is just another Tuesday. I have seen that engine. I have touched the cam lobes. They felt like polished river stones, smooth and even, the wear distributed across every surface the way the engineers designed. That is what a million-mile motor looks like from the inside. Not magic, not mystery. Just 1,000 small decisions made the same way every time, for 30 years straight, by an owner who never once treated the maintenance schedule as optional. The Lexus LS400 is the third car, and it deserves its own breath. Built like a piece of laboratory equipment, the 1UZ-FE V8 has shown up in 7-figure-mile builds more than any other Japanese luxury motor I can think of. Many mechanics in the high-mileage community will tell you that the LS400 is the closest thing the modern era produced to a sealed Swiss watch. The owners tend to be older, more methodical, and they almost always follow the same maintenance discipline. That is not a coincidence. The car attracts a certain driver, and that driver does the one thing the rule demands. There is a story I heard from a retired service writer who tracked one LS400 customer for almost 20 years. The customer brought the car in like clockwork every 3 months, regardless of mileage, and refused to let the shop extend his interval even when the manufacturer updated the recommendations. He said he did not care what the manual said. He cared what the oil looked like coming out, and it always came out the color of light maple syrup, never the dark molasses you see in neglected motors. That image stayed with me. Light maple syrup. That is the color of an engine that is going to outlive its owner. I will name the rule soon, I promise. But I want you to feel the pattern first, because if I just tell you, you will dismiss it as something you already know. Now, let me take you through the climax of this whole list, because the fourth car is the single most important data point in everything I am about to share. The Chevy Silverado, specifically a Silverado HD that crossed 1 million miles on the original 6.0-liter Vortec, owned by a long-haul contractor named Dale out of central Kansas, who drove the truck for 19 years between jobs and parts runs. Dale's truck got featured on a small local news segment, and the camera caught him pulling the dipstick. The oil on it was clean, light, the color of weak tea. He had run that engine on a strict short interval his entire ownership. He never towed beyond rated capacity. He never let the temperature gauge climb past the middle. And he never, ever ignored a small noise. That last part matters more than people realize. Dale told the reporter that he pulled into a shop 3 separate times for noises that turned out to be nothing. 3 times he paid for a diagnostic that found no problem. He considered that money well spent. Most owners would call those 3 visits a waste. Dale called them insurance. That mindset, that willingness to overreact early, is half the rule. The other half is even simpler, and we will get there soon. I want you to hold Dale's example in your head as we move through the next few cars, because his pattern repeats with eerie consistency. The fifth car is the Volvo P1800, and this is the one that broke my assumptions hardest. A Volvo coupe from 1966, driven by a single owner across roughly 3 million miles before he passed. 3 million. I had to read that number twice the first time I encountered it. The engine had been rebuilt, yes, but the chassis, the gearbox internals at certain points, and the basic discipline of the maintenance were all rooted in the owner's habit. He kept handwritten logs. Every oil change, every belt, every fluid, every tire rotation. He drove the car like it was a living thing he was responsible for. The logs themselves became famous in collector circles. Pages and pages of small, careful entries in pencil, the kind of record-keeping you might expect from a ship's captain, rather than a sedan owner. He drove the car to work, to vacations, across the country and back, and he documented every single service event with the patience of a man who understood that consistency compounds. And here is the part that flipped me. He did not baby it. He drove it across continents. He drove it in winter. He drove it in heat. The car was used hard. It just was not used carelessly. That distinction between hard use and careless use is the line most owners cannot see. Hard use is fine. Engines were built for it. Careless use is the slow poison. A skipped oil change. A coolant top-up that never happens. A noise ignored for 6 months. That is what kills a motor, not the highway miles. Let me sit with that for a moment, because I almost wrote the wrong thing. I almost said the Volvo owner babied his engine. He did not. I want to correct myself there, because the truth is more useful. The million-mile drivers do not coddle their cars. They use them. They just respect them. The difference shows up in the oil pan, and the cam journals and the bearings, where varnish either forms or does not. A pampered engine that sits in a garage and gets short trips actually wears worse than a hard-driven engine that sees full operating temperature every day. The P1800 ran hot, ran long, and ran clean because it ran the way an engine is designed to run. Sitting is the enemy. Movement is the medicine. Get the metal up to temperature. Hold it there. Let the oil do its full job, and the car will reward you with miles you did not know you had coming. The sixth car is the Mercedes 240D, the diesel sedan from the late 70s and early 80s that earned a reputation for indestructibility. I have personally seen one with 1.4 million miles on. The original OM Sync 116 engine, running parts deliveries in the Southwest. The owner, a soft-spoken man named Hector from Tucson, who had owned the car since he was 26, told me he had never let the car sit cold for more than a few days. He drove it, constantly, even when he did not need to. Short trips were rare in his ownership because he intentionally took the long way home, the highway loop instead of the city street, just to let the engine reach and hold full temperature. That habit is invisible on the surface. It does not show up in any maintenance log, but it might be the single highest leverage decision a driver can make for engine life. Diesels especially. They live or die by sustained operating temperature. The engine note on Hector's 240D was the kind of low, confident hum you could feel through the floor pan. Not labored, not rough, just steady, like a sewing machine that had been running for 50 years without missing a stitch. When I climbed underneath to check the pan for leaks, the bottom of that engine was as dry as a sun-bleached stone. No weeping, no seepage, just clean, dry, original castings that had been pampered by the simple act of being driven the way the engineers intended. Hector also told me he never raced a cold engine. He let the oil pressure stabilize for a few seconds, then drove off gently for the first mile, every single time, for almost 40 years. That single ritual probably saved him 3 engines worth of wear. The seventh car is the Ford Crown Victoria, the Panther platform sedan that fleet operators and taxi companies ran into the ground for decades. I have worked on Crown Vics with 800,000 miles still in active service. There is one that crossed 1 million as a New York City taxi, idling more than half its life, which, by every textbook, should have killed it twice over. It did not. The 4.6 modular V8 kept running because the fleet that owned it followed a rigid service schedule that did not flex for cost cutting. Most fleets cheap out at some point. The ones that produce million-mile cars do not. I have stood inside a taxi garage at midnight and watched a service technician changed the oil on a Crown Vic that had rolled in at 850,000 miles. And the bay supervisor told me they did this on every car, every 3,000 miles. No exceptions, no negotiation, no waiting for a slow day. The fleet manager understood something most owners do not. He understood that the cost of a quart of oil and a HCR filter is the cheapest insurance policy in the entire automotive world. The pattern again is discipline. The pattern again is the rule I keep teasing. I will name it in 2 more cars. Stay with me. Because once you see how universal this is, across 9 completely different cars from completely different countries with completely different engines, the conclusion becomes impossible to argue with. The 8th car is the Subaru Legacy, which surprises people because Subarus have a reputation, fair or not, for head gasket trouble. The legacy of the Legacy, if you will excuse the wordplay, is mixed. But there are documented examples of Legacies crossing 7 figures with original blocks, and every single one of those owners did the same thing the others did. There is a Legacy wagon in the Pacific Northwest that crossed 1 million miles in the hands of a woman named Brenda from a small coastal town outside Olympia, who used the car for a rural mail route over 22 years. Brenda's car saw constant short stops, constant restarts, exactly the kind of duty cycle that destroys most engines. The mail route was the worst possible duty for an engine. Drive 30 feet, stop. Drive 30 feet, stop. Engine never reaches stable temperature. Oil never fully circulates. Condensation never burns off. Most cars die that death within 10 years. Hers survived because she changed the oil twice as often as the manual suggested. Not once, twice. She told me she treated the interval in the manual as the latest possible date, not the recommended one. That sentence rearranged how I think about maintenance intervals for everyone, not just Subaru owners. Brenda also kept the engine warmed up properly on the rare occasions she did a longer trip. Every Sunday, she drove the Legacy on a 40-mile loop up the coast just to bake out the moisture and let the oil reach full temperature. She called it the boxer's bath. The horizontally opposed, engine getting its weekly steam clean from the inside. The result was a motor that lasted 1 million miles in conditions that should have killed it 3 times over. The 9th car is the BMW E30. The boxy 3 Series from the late 80s that gearheads worship and the general public underestimates. There is an E30 still on the road outside Stuttgart, owned for 31 years by a retired aerospace engineer named Klaus from a small town just south of the city. And the odometer on that car crossed 1 million miles in the spring of its 29th year of service. The original M20 inline-6 is still in the bay. Same head, same block, same crank. Klaus rebuilt the timing assembly twice, on schedule, never under duress. He treats the cooling system like the most important system in the car, because on a German inline-6 it is. Coolant flushed every 2 years without fail. Radiator replaced preemptively at year 12, before it had a chance to fail and cook the head. Water pumps swapped on the same interval as the timing belt, even when it was still good, because he understood that the cost of doing it once is half the cost of doing it twice. The oil interval on that car has been 3,000 miles for 31 years. Not 5, not 7, 3. And he runs the engine warm before he asks anything of it. The E30 lives in my head because it disproved the assumption I had carried for years that European enthusiast cars were destined to live fast and die young. Klaus's car drove fast. It drove hard. It also drove conservatively when the road called for it, and it never once got asked to perform on cold oil. The dipstick on his M20 still shows the color of light tea, even after a long week of commuting. That is not luck. That is 31 years of the same quiet habit, applied every 3,000 miles, without negotiation and without exception. The E30 closes our list of 9, and now we get to the contrast that ties them all together. Here is the contrast nobody talks about. The average driver and the million-mile driver own the same car, same model, same year. Same factory tolerances. They start from identical hardware. Yet one engine dies at 150,000 and the other crosses 7 figures. And the gap between them is not parts, not luck, not climate. It is the ritual around every single cold start and every single oil change. The average driver waits for the dash light. The million-mile driver replaces the oil weeks before the dash would ever think to ask. The average driver lets the car idle in the driveway. On a cold morning, sipping coffee, thinking they are doing the engine a favor. The million-mile driver knows that idling produces almost no heat in the oil pan and just rolls out gently, light throttle, until the temperature gauge moves off the cold peg. The average driver picks the cheapest filter on the shelf because it is on sale. The million-mile driver buys the exact filter the engineers specified every time, because a filter that bypasses under pressure is worse than no filter at all. The average driver hears a new sound and turns up the radio. The million-mile driver hears a new sound and pulls into a bay the next morning. Same hardware, different stewardship. The first owner pays for an engine rebuild at 180,000 miles. The second owner pays for nothing more than oil, filters, belts, and a few hoses, and rolls past 1 million with the same compression numbers the car had on the factory floor. The cars are not different. The drivers are. Many high-mileage owners report the same set of small decisions repeated thousands of times until the small decisions become invisible to them and visible only in the odometer. That is the contrast. It is not dramatic. It is not exotic. It is a fingernail's width of difference in attention, applied every single day for decades. So here it is, the rule. The single shared habit across all 9 of these cars, from the Honda Accord to the BMW E30, from the Land Cruiser in the Australian dust to the Crown Vic on the New York night shift. Every one of these owners changed the oil before the engine asked. That is the rule. That is the entire video distilled into one sentence. They did not wait for a service light. They did not wait for the manual's outer limit. They did not wait for the oil to look dark on the dipstick. They drained it out while it was still doing its job, while it still held its viscosity, while it still carried its additive package intact, and they put fresh oil back in on a calendar interval that beat the manufacturer's recommendation by a wide margin. That is the climax. That is the single most important takeaway of this entire video. Write it down if you have to. Stick it on the dashboard if you have to. Change the oil before the engine asks. Many mechanics in the high mileage community will tell you the same thing in different words. And industry teardown data suggests the engines that survive past 700,000 miles almost always belong to owners who beat the manufacturer's interval by a third or more. Not because the manufacturer is lying, because the manufacturer's interval is calibrated for warranty coverage, not for 30-year service life. The owners on this list understood that distinction. They treated the maintenance schedule as a deadline, not a target. And the engines rewarded them with miles their neighbors thought were impossible. In my experience, no other single habit produces this much engine life for this little money. None. Not premium fuel, not synthetic upgrades, not aftermarket additives, just clean oil, changed early, every time, for as long as you own the car. What does that mean for your car, sitting in your driveway right now? It means the calendar on your phone is more important than the sticker on your windshield. The sticker tells you the maximum the manufacturer is willing to defend. The calendar tells you the minimum the engine actually wants. Pick a real interval, 3,000 to 5,000 miles, depending on your climate and driving pattern, and protect it the way the owners on this list protect theirs. Do not let it slip. Do not let a busy week push it to the next month. Do not convince yourself the oil still looks fine. The damage from extended intervals does not show up on the dipstick. It shows up 10 years later, in cylinder bores that no longer hold compression, in bearings that have started to chatter, in a cam lobe that is rounded off because the oil film thinned out one too many times. The Hondas and the Lexuses and the Mercedes diesels did not get lucky. They got attended to. By owners who understood that the small ritual on a Saturday morning is the entire foundation of a 30-year ownership. Many high-mileage owners report that once they shifted to a strict short interval, the engine itself started to sound different within a few thousand miles. Quieter at idle, smoother at speed, less hesitation on a cold start. The metal responds to clean oil the way skin responds to clean water. Quickly, visibly, gratefully. 6 months from now, you will be the driver going past the repair shop without stopping. Picture it for a second. A warm Saturday afternoon. The windows cracked an inch, the radio low. You roll up to the light beside the shop you used to visit twice a year for problems you did not understand. The bay door is open. You can see a hood up, a tech under it, a customer in the waiting room scrolling a phone. You glance over for a second, then the light turns green, and you go. No appointment, no invoice, no quiet dread about what the diagnostic will say. The lifters are quiet. The fuel gauge is dropping slower than it used to, because a clean engine breathed the way it was designed to breathe. The temperature needle is sitting dead center, where it has lived for months without drifting. You can feel the engine through the steering wheel, that low steady note that means everything inside the block is making contact through a clean film of oil that was poured in 2 weeks ago. The dipstick this morning came out the color of weak tea. Not coffee, not molasses, tea. The cabin smells like warm leather, and nothing else, no faint burnt oil tang, no coolant sweetness drifting up through the vents. You did one boring thing on a calendar, over and over, and the car answered back with the kind of quiet reliability your neighbors keep asking you about. That is what this is for. Not the bragging rights, not the odometer number. The morning you walk out to a car that just works, and the next morning, and the next, and the next, until working becomes the only thing the car knows how to do. Change the oil before the engine asks.